She came to be milked, but I hadn't touched a woman in 20 years. The quiet had been his companion for many years, and yet sometimes it reminded him of everything he had lost. His name was Ahmed. He had once been a man full of life, laughter, and warmth. He had friends, colleagues, and a family who loved him, but life, as it often does, had changed course for him. Circumstances had forced him into solitude, and for 20 years he had lived alone, avoiding close relationships. The memories of the past haunted him sometimes, but he had grown used to living in this quiet world, one where he could control everything and no one could hurt him. Each morning, Ahmed followed the same routine. He woke up before the sun rose fully, made himself a cup of tea, and looked out of the window at the field stretching beyond his house. The village was slowly coming to life, with the distant sound of roosters crowing and the faint murmur of people starting their day. He liked watching the world move while he remained still. There was a strange comfort in being invisible, in moving through life without expecting anything from it. After his tea, he would step outside into his small garden. It was not much, but it had been his pride. Over the years, he had planted flowers, vegetables, and fruit trees. Caring for them gave him purpose, a reason to wake up in the morning. He would water the plants, pull out weeds, and watch the tiny buds grow into vibrant life. It was a simple life, but it kept his mind busy and gave him peace. Ahmed's house was filled with memories, some pleasant, some painful. Old photographs lined the walls. Pictures of him as a young man, smiling broadly, surrounded by friends, family, and even a wife he had loved dearly. He often stared at them, a faint smile appearing on his lips, but his heart felt heavy at the same time. The life he once had seemed like a dream, distant and unreachable. He had loved deeply once, but that chapter of his life had closed in a way he could not understand fully. He had lost someone dear, and that loss had made him withdraw from the world. Even though he had avoided people for 20 years, Ahmed was not unhappy. He had learned to live with himself. He found small joys in simple things, the smell of fresh bread from the village bakery, the laughter of children playing outside, and the gentle songs of birds in the morning. He liked reading too. His small bookshelf was filled with novels, biographies, and stories from faraway lands. Reading allowed him to travel without leaving his home. He could imagine bustling cities, peaceful countryside, and people with stories unlike his own. For a moment, he could escape the quiet that enveloped his life. But sometimes, the loneliness pressed down on him. On certain evenings, when the sun dipped low and the sky turned a deep shade of orange, he would sit by the window and feel the emptiness around him. He would think of the past, of love lost, of friends he had not seen in years. A dull ache would form in his chest, and he would remember what it felt like to hold someone's hand, to talk late into the night, or to laugh with someone who truly understood him. Those memories were bittersweet, and he often pushed them away, afraid that they would overwhelm him. Despite the solitude, Ahmed had developed a routine that gave structure to his days. He went to the village market twice a week. He greeted the shopkeepers politely, though he never lingered for long. People knew him as a quiet, reserved man, but one who was trustworthy and kind. He bought what he needed, vegetables, bread, and sometimes a small treat for himself. On his way back, he would sometimes stop by the river, watch the water flow, and listen to the rustling of leaves in the wind. Those small moments of nature gave him a sense of calm, a reminder that life continued, no matter how still he felt inside. Ahmed also had a small circle of acquaintances. They were not friends in the traditional sense, but they respected him, and he respected them. There was Mr. Khan, an elderly man who ran the bakery, and Mrs. Sadek, a woman who sold flowers. Occasionally, they would chat briefly about the weather or village news, but the conversations never went deep. Ahmed liked it that way. He had learned that people came and went, and it was safer to keep them at a distance. He had seen too many goodbyes, too many disappointments to risk opening his heart again. In the evenings, Ahmed would sit in his chair by the fireplace, the room dimly lit by the warm glow of the fire. He would sip tea, read a book, or simply watched the flames dance. He liked the predictability of the fire, its steady warmth and light. Sometimes he would play old music on a small radio, melodies that reminded him of times long past. They brought a quiet joy, a sense of connection to the world outside, even if only for a short while. Ahmed's mind often wandered to questions he had avoided for years. Why had life turned out this way? Was it fate, or his own choices that led him here? He did not dwell on these thoughts for long, afraid that they might spiral into sadness. Instead, he focused on the present, on the small, tangible tasks he could accomplish each day. And yet, deep down, a part of him still longed for companionship. He would not admit it to anyone, not even himself, but he missed the presence of another human being. The thought of being with someone again seemed distant, almost impossible, but the idea lingered quietly at the edge of his mind. On this particular morning, as Ahmed moved through his routine, he felt an unusual restlessness. It was subtle at first, a small tug at the corners of his heart. He could not name it, but it made him pause. Something in the air felt different. Perhaps it was the way the sunlight fell on the garden, or the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees. He could not tell, but he felt a faint sense of anticipation, as if life itself had decided to nudge him in a new direction. He shrugged off the feeling and continued with his day. He prepared breakfast, tended to the garden, and stepped outside to inspect the small vegetables growing in neat rows. Each plant seemed to reflect his own life, steady, patient, waiting for growth despite the odds. He smiled at the thought, feeling a rare sense of satisfaction. Even in isolation, he had nurtured life and beauty, and that gave him pride. The hours passed slowly. The village outside was alive with people going about their daily tasks. Children laughed and ran past his house. Villagers called out greetings to one another, and the faint sound of a cart moving over the dirt road echoed through the air. Ahmed watched it all silently, feeling like a spectator in a world he no longer fully belonged to. He observed, but he did not participate. The years of solitude had made him cautious, wary of forming connections. Yet there was a faint hope stirring inside him, a small ember that he could not quite extinguish. By the afternoon, Ahmed had settled into his favorite chair by the window, a book in hand, but his thoughts wandered again. He reflected on his past mistakes, on the relationships that had ended too soon, and on the fear that had driven him away from intimacy. He realized that he had spent 2 decades hiding from life, avoiding the very experiences that made existence meaningful. Yet, he also knew that he had survived, that he had endured, and that he had grown stronger in ways others might not understand. His solitude had shaped him, but it had not broken him. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, Ahmed felt a quiet resolve forming within him. He did not know what the future held, and he did not expect anything dramatic to change overnight. But for the first time in many years, he felt a small flicker of curiosity about what lay ahead. Life, he realized, was unpredictable, and perhaps that unpredictability was not entirely unwelcome. The evening air was cool and fragrant with the scent of flowers. Ahmed stepped outside for a moment, taking a deep breath and letting the calm wash over him. The world was alive, and even in his solitude, he felt a connection to it. He knew that change might come slowly, and perhaps it might come from an unexpected direction. The thought did not scare him as it once would have. Instead, it brought a quiet excitement, a gentle reminder that life was still moving, still capable of surprising him in ways he could not predict. As night fell, Ahmed returned to his chair by the fire. The flames danced and crackled, casting shadows on the walls filled with memories. He sat quietly, reflecting on the day and the years that had passed. He realized that even though he had lived in isolation, he had also lived fully in his own way. He had survived, he had cared for life around him, and he had found small joys in ordinary moments. Yet deep down, he knew that perhaps it was time to let life surprise him once more, to open his heart, even if only a little, to the possibilities that lay ahead. And so, as the fire burned low and the night wrapped the house in a gentle silence, Ahmed closed his eyes and allowed himself to imagine something new, something bright, unexpected, and perhaps, just perhaps, filled with the warmth of human connection once more. The next morning, Ahmed awoke to the same gentle sunlight spilling through the dusty windows. The house was quiet, as it always was, but there was a subtle shift in the air that he could not explain. He felt a faint sense of anticipation, a flutter in his chest, though he had no reason to feel it. It was as if life itself was about to step through his front door and surprise him. He went about his usual routine, making tea, checking the garden, and inspecting the small vegetables and flowers he had nurtured. Everything seemed ordinary, yet his mind kept returning to that strange feeling. He shook his head, telling himself he was imagining things. After 20 years of solitude, even the smallest deviation from the ordinary could seem significant. By mid-morning, Ahmed heard a knock at the door. It was soft, tentative, but distinct. He froze for a moment, startled by the unexpected sound. Visitors were rare in his life, and he had grown accustomed to being alone. Slowly, he walked to the door and opened it, peering outside. Standing there was a young woman, perhaps in her early 30s, with a kind face and cautious eyes. She held a small bag in her hand and looked a little lost. Her clothes were simple but neat, suggesting she was careful and organized. She smiled politely, a mixture of hope and hesitation in her expression. "Good morning," she said softly. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I'm looking for someone who might be able to help me." He noticed the nervousness in her voice, the slight tremble in her hands, and the way she glanced around his modest house as if uncertain of her surroundings. Something about her presence felt unusual, yet comforting, like a gentle breeze after a long, hot day. "You can come in," Ahmed said finally, stepping aside. His voice sounded firmer than he felt, but he wanted to appear welcoming. The woman nodded gratefully and stepped inside, placing her bag carefully on the floor. They stood in the small living room for a moment, neither speaking, both measuring the unfamiliar space and the unfamiliar presence of another human being. Ahmed had not had anyone in his home for years, and the silence between them was heavy yet filled with potential. "My name is Sarah," she said after a while, breaking the quiet. "I was told you might be able to help me. I don't have many options right now, and I was hoping for some guidance." "Tell me what brings you here." "I need work, a place to stay for a little while. I don't have family nearby, and I was told you might help people in need. I know this is unusual, but I have no one else to turn to." He noticed her honesty, her vulnerability, and the quiet strength beneath it. She was not demanding or entitled. She was simply asking for help, a request made with humility and hope. "You can stay here for a while," he said finally, surprising even himself. His words were simple, but they carried weight. He had never hosted anyone in his home in 20 years. The idea of sharing his space, even temporarily, was unusual, yet he felt a quiet certainty that he could do it. Sarah's eyes brightened, though she tried to hide it. "Thank you," she said softly. "I promise I won't be a burden. I'll do whatever is needed. Otherwise, you can rest and settle in." He was cautious, wary of forming attachments. 20 years of solitude had made him protective of his heart, and he did not want to rush into connection. But Sarah was patient. She did not force conversation or demand attention. Instead, she offered small gestures of kindness, a warm smile in the morning, a cup of tea prepared just the way he liked it, a soft laugh when something amused her. Gradually, Ahmed began to feel a shift inside himself. The house no longer felt empty. The silence was no longer heavy. Her presence filled the space with life, and though he did not admit it to anyone, he began to look forward to her company. He noticed little things, the way she watered the plants, how she hummed quietly while tidying up, the way she listened carefully when he spoke. It was a gentle companionship, one that required no pressure, no demands, just presence. One afternoon, as they were tending the garden together, Ahmed found himself talking about the past. He spoke cautiously, sharing fragments of his life, careful not to reveal too much. Sarah listened attentively, nodding occasionally, never interrupting, never judging. For the first time in decades, Ahmed felt the strange comfort of being understood without explanation. "I haven't had anyone to talk to like this in a long time," he admitted quietly, almost to himself. "It's strange but good. Sharing even small parts of your story can help." Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of life slowly adjusted to the presence of another person. Ahmed and Sarah settled into a comfortable routine. She would help with the chores, and he would tend to the garden and prepare meals. In the evenings, they would sit together by the fire, talking quietly about books, news from the village, and small observations about life. There was no rush, no pressure, only the slow, steady growth of trust and companionship. Ahmed noticed changes in himself that he had not expected. He laughed more often, at times even at his own forgetfulness or clumsy mistakes. He felt lighter, as if the presence of another human being had lifted a weight he had carried for decades. Even the house felt warmer, more alive. The walls no longer echoed only with his own footsteps. They now held the soft sounds of conversation, laughter, and the quiet movements of someone caring about the same space he cared for. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of gold and orange, Ahmed found himself watching Sarah quietly. She was arranging flowers by the window, her movements careful and thoughtful. The way she focused on small tasks, the gentle smile on her face, the calm presence she brought to the room, all of it touched something deep within him. He realized that human connection, even after 20 years of isolation, was not something to fear. It could be gentle, kind, and fulfilling. He remembered the days when he had been younger, when life had been vibrant and full of energy. He had loved deeply once, and though that chapter had ended, he now understood that life had not closed off entirely. There was still room for kindness, companionship, and even friendship. He did not know what the future held, and he did not need to. The present moment, shared with someone who respected him and brought warmth into his life, was enough. One night after a quiet dinner, they sat by the fire as usual. The room was dimly lit, and the only sounds were the crackling flames and the occasional turning of a page. Ahmed spoke softly, his voice carrying the weight of years of solitude. "Thank you for coming here," he said. "I didn't know I needed this until you arrived. It feels right, having someone else in the house, having someone to share moments with. I didn't realize how much I missed it. Maybe this is one of those times for both of us." For the first time in decades, he felt a sense of ease, a quiet happiness in knowing that life could still surprise him in gentle, meaningful ways. As the fire burned low and the night wrapped the house in a peaceful silence, Ahmed realized that the days ahead did not need to be lonely. There was a path unfolding before him, uncertain and new, yet filled with the quiet promise of companionship. He had learned to survive alone, but now he was learning what it meant to live with someone else nearby, not as a burden, but as a shared presence that made life richer, fuller, and more meaningful. And so, in the simple rhythm of shared days, Ahmed and Sarah began to form a connection. It was slow, cautious, and respectful, built on small acts of kindness and quiet understanding. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic revelations, only the gentle growth of trust, companionship, and the beginning of something new, a light in the quiet life that had once felt so still and lonely. Days passed in a quiet rhythm, but for Ahmed, the presence of Sarah in the house had begun to stir thoughts and emotions he had long kept buried. He found himself remembering the past more vividly than before. Memories he had tucked away for 20 years now surfaced without warning, moments of laughter, companionship, and love, but also the pain and loss that had driven him into solitude. It started one afternoon when Ahmed was tending the garden, planting new seeds for the coming season. The soil was soft and warm under his fingers, and the sun cast a gentle light across the rows of vegetables and flowers. Sarah was nearby, arranging a small pot of marigolds by the window. Her presence was calm, yet it seemed to awaken something inside him, a quiet reflection on how life had changed over the years. Ahmed remembered his younger days vividly. He remembered his first love, the excitement and joy of shared moments, the laughter that filled rooms, and the warmth of companionship. He remembered the arguments too, the misunderstandings, and the eventual heartbreak that had made him retreat from human connection. It had been easier to close himself off than to face the uncertainty and pain that relationships sometimes brought. But now, as he watched Sarah quietly move through the house, performing small acts of care and attention, he realized how much he had missed simple connection. It was not just companionship he missed, but the feeling of being understood, of being seen by another person without pretense or judgment. Sarah had come into his life unexpectedly, yet she was already teaching him lessons he had forgotten: patience, trust, and the quiet joy of shared moments. One evening after dinner, Ahmed sat by the fireplace, a cup of tea in his hands. Sarah had just left the room to fetch a blanket and the house was still. He stared into the flames, thinking about how carefully he had built his walls over the years and how gently Sarah was beginning to break them down. It was not that she demanded anything from him. She simply existed in his life in a way that made space for trust to grow. He thought about the mistakes of his past, how he had pushed people away, how he had let fear guide his choices. He remembered the loneliness that followed, the years of silence, and the small, aching hope that life might one day feel different. He realized that the solitude he had relied upon for so long had protected him, but it had also kept him from experiencing life fully. And now, faced with the possibility of companionship again, he felt both excitement and fear. Ahmed remembered the last time he had allowed himself to truly connect with someone. It had been decades ago, and the memory was bittersweet. He remembered the feeling of holding another person's hand, the warmth of shared laughter, and the quiet comfort of simply being together. Those moments had shaped him, yet he had also been hurt deeply, leaving scars that took years to heal. That pain had made him cautious, wary of letting anyone in. But Sarah was different. She did not rush, she did not demand, and she did not judge. Over the following days, Ahmed found himself reflecting more openly. He began to talk to Sarah about small fragments of his life, stories from his childhood, memories of friends who had moved away, and moments of simple joy that he had once experienced. He noticed that sharing even these small pieces felt relieving, like lifting a small weight from his heart. Sarah listened attentively, offering gentle encouragement without intrusion. Her presence felt safe, and for the first time in years, Ahmed felt the freedom to be himself fully. One afternoon, while they were organizing the small library of books in the living room, Ahmed stumbled upon an old photograph tucked behind a shelf. It was a picture of him and his late wife, smiling in a way that spoke of deep affection. He held it carefully, tracing the edges with his fingers. Memories flooded back, their first meeting, the shared dreams, and the life they had built together. He felt a pang of sadness, but also gratitude for having known love at all. Sarah noticed his expression and asked quietly, "Who is this?" Even if life changed, those memories are part of who you are. Sarah's presence reminded him that life could hold both sorrow and joy, and that remembering the past did not prevent him from moving forward. In the following days, Ahmed began to open up more. He shared stories of his youth, the small adventures he had experienced, and even the mistakes he had made. He spoke about the fear that had led him into solitude and how it had shaped his life. Sarah listened quietly, offering understanding without judgment. Her patience was remarkable, and it gave Ahmed the courage to confront emotions he had long avoided. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned shades of pink and orange, Ahmed and Sarah sat together in the garden. They were not speaking much. Instead, they simply watched the world around them. Birds returned to their nests, the wind rustled the leaves, and the garden was alive with quiet movement. Ahmed felt a deep sense of peace. He realized that life did not have to be grand to be meaningful. Simple moments, shared in quiet companionship, could be just as fulfilling as any adventure. Over time, Ahmed noticed subtle changes in himself. He laughed more easily, smiled more often, and found joy in small routines. He began to appreciate the presence of another person, not as a necessity, but as a gift. Sarah's kindness, patience, and gentle encouragement were teaching him that human connection was not something to fear, even after decades of isolation. He felt his heart opening slowly, carefully, like a flower blooming in the spring sunlight. There were moments of hesitation, of course. Ahmed still carried the weight of past pain, and he sometimes feared getting too close. But Sarah's presence reminded him that connection did not have to be risky or overwhelming. It could be gentle, gradual, and respectful. She was not trying to replace the past. She was simply offering companionship, a steady presence in a life that had long been lonely. One afternoon, while preparing lunch together, Ahmed reflected on the lessons he had learned in the past months. He realized that solitude had taught him resilience, patience, and self-reliance. But it had also shown him the limits of isolation, the emptiness that comes from avoiding human connection entirely. Sarah's arrival had reminded him that life could still surprise him, that trust could still be built, and that emotional closeness was not something to fear. As the weeks passed, Ahmed began to embrace the changes in his life. He allowed himself to enjoy small moments with Sarah, sharing tea in the morning, laughing at small jokes, and appreciating the quiet presence of another person. He discovered that companionship did not erase the past or diminish his independence. Instead, it enriched his life, adding layers of warmth, understanding, and shared experience. One evening, Ahmed found himself sitting quietly by the fireplace, reflecting on the journey so far. He realized that Sarah's presence had not only brought companionship, but had also helped him confront his own fears and memories. He had faced the pain of past losses, acknowledged the joy of former relationships, and slowly begun to accept the possibility of connection once again. The process was gradual, gentle, and deeply meaningful. Ahmed looked at Sarah, who was arranging a small stack of books nearby. He felt a surge of gratitude for her patience, kindness, and understanding. She had entered his life quietly, without demand or expectation, and had given him the courage to open his heart again. He realized that trust, once lost, could be rebuilt slowly, and that emotional connection was possible even after decades of isolation. That night, as Ahmed prepared for bed, he reflected on the lessons he had learned. Life, he realized, was unpredictable. It could bring sorrow, loss, and heartbreak, but it could also bring joy, companionship, and renewal. Sarah's presence was a reminder that it was never too late to embrace connection, to share moments, and to find warmth in another human being. For the first time in many years, Ahmed went to sleep feeling a quiet sense of hope. He did not know what the future held, and he did not need to. He had learned that life was not about certainty or control. It was about presence, patience, and the willingness to open one's heart to possibilities, however small or gradual they might be. And so, in the gentle rhythm of daily life, Ahmed continued to confront his past, embrace the present, and cautiously step toward a future that held promise. With Sarah by his side, he discovered that trust could be rebuilt, connection could be nurtured, and even the quietest life could be filled with warmth, understanding, and the quiet joy of companionship. The days grew warmer as spring moved into early summer, and Ahmed felt a subtle shift within himself. Life, which had once felt predictable and still, now carried a quiet rhythm of companionship that he had not known for decades. Sarah had become an integral part of his daily routine, and her presence brought a comfort that Ahmed had long thought impossible to experience again. He woke up each morning with a gentle sense of anticipation, curious about what the day might bring. It was not a loud excitement, but a calm awareness that life could hold small surprises and quiet joys. He brewed his tea, tended the garden, and occasionally shared moments with Sarah as they prepared breakfast together. The house, once filled with the echoes of his solitary footsteps, now resonated with the small sounds of life: laughter, conversation, and the occasional hum of a song. Ahmed began to notice changes in himself that went beyond the mere comfort of having someone nearby. He laughed more easily, smiled more freely, and found joy in small, ordinary tasks. Even simple activities like watering the plants or arranging the kitchen felt richer when shared with another person. The house seemed warmer, the garden more vibrant, and the quiet moments more meaningful. Life, he realized, could be gentle and fulfilling without grandeur or spectacle. One afternoon, while Ahmed and Sarah were walking along the narrow path leading to the village, he reflected on the journey he had taken over the past months. He remembered the long years of solitude, the fear that had kept him from opening his heart, and the slow process of rebuilding trust. He realized that Sarah had taught him the most important lessons, not through words alone, but through her patience, kindness, and quiet understanding. She had reminded him that connection was not something to fear, that trust could grow slowly, and that companionship could bring warmth without demanding too much. Sarah noticed him looking thoughtful and asked softly, "What are you thinking about?" Sometimes life gives us a second chance, even if we don't expect it. It doesn't erase the past, but it adds something new, something gentle and meaningful. But now he understood that life was not only about avoiding pain, it was also about embracing the possibility of joy, even after disappointment. In the following weeks, Ahmed began to embrace this renewed sense of life more fully. He allowed himself to enjoy shared meals with Sarah, conversations about books and village news, and the simple comfort of having someone nearby. He discovered that companionship did not diminish his independence. Instead, it enriched his life, adding layers of warmth and understanding. He realized that trust, once rebuilt, could become a source of strength rather than vulnerability. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Ahmed and Sarah sat together in the garden. The flowers swayed gently in the breeze, and the air was filled with the faint hum of evening insects. Ahmed felt a deep sense of peace as he watched Sarah arrange a small bouquet of blossoms. He realized that life's simplest moments, shared quietly with another person, could be profoundly fulfilling. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "I never thought I could feel this way again. After all these years, it feels like a gift." He realized that life's challenges and losses had not ended his capacity for joy. They had only made him more aware of its value. Over time, Ahmed and Sarah developed a deep understanding of one another. They did not need to speak constantly or fill every silence with words. Their companionship was built on quiet observation, shared routines, and mutual respect. Ahmed learned that intimacy was not only about physical closeness, it was also about emotional presence, understanding, and trust. He found fulfillment in simply being present with another person who cared for him, just as he cared for her. One afternoon, Ahmed was repairing a small fence in the garden, while Sarah prepared a light snack nearby. He paused to wipe the sweat from his brow and looked at her. A feeling of gratitude and admiration filled his chest. He realized that life had offered him something precious, a companion who brought light and warmth into his days without asking for anything in return. Sarah noticed him watching her and smiled. "You're thinking too much again," she teased gently. Ahmed laughed softly, a sound that had become more frequent in recent months. "Perhaps," he admitted, "but it's a good kind of thinking. I'm grateful for this, grateful for you." He no longer feared the passage of time or the uncertainty of the future. Instead, he welcomed each day as an opportunity to experience small joys, to nurture life, and to share moments with someone who understood him. As the summer days stretched on, Ahmed noticed that his routine, once solitary and predictable, had become richer and more meaningful. He looked forward to mornings with Sarah, enjoyed afternoons in the garden together, and appreciated evenings spent by the fire, talking quietly or simply enjoying each other's presence. Life no longer felt stagnant. It was filled with gentle energy, warmth, and the quiet excitement of companionship. One evening, After a day of tending the garden and preparing dinner, Ahmed and Sarah sat outside on the small wooden bench near the vegetable patch. The sky was clear, stars beginning to twinkle, and a soft breeze carried the scent of flowers and fresh earth. Ahmed felt a profound sense of calm, a feeling he had not experienced in decades. The long years of solitude, the pain of past loss, and the fear that had kept him isolated all seemed distant. "I feel different," he said quietly, looking at Sarah. "Not just happier, but lighter. It's as if I've been carrying a weight for years and now it's slowly lifting." Life can be heavy when we carry it alone, but sharing it, carefully, gently, can make all the difference. Now, with Sarah's presence in his life, he could embrace the present fully and even look forward to the future with quiet hope. In the weeks that followed, Ahmed noticed a growing sense of fulfillment. The small joys of daily life, watering the plants, arranging flowers, sharing a cup of tea, listening to music, became moments of quiet happiness. He found himself appreciating Sarah's presence not because he needed her to fill a void, but because she brought depth, warmth, and understanding to his life. He began to understand that true connection was not about dependency. It was about mutual respect, shared experiences, and emotional closeness. One morning, as Ahmed and Sarah walked to the village market, he reflected on how much his life had changed. He remembered the man he had been 20 years ago, isolated, cautious, and fearful of intimacy. Now, he felt a sense of freedom, a release from the burdens he had carried alone for so long. He realized that human connection, even after decades of solitude, could bring joy, comfort, and purpose. At the market, they greeted familiar faces together. Shopkeepers noticed the ease with which Ahmed interacted with Sarah, a gentle warmth in his manner that had been absent for years. He realized that life's richness was not only in solitude or reflection, but also in shared presence and connection. It was in small smiles, quiet conversations, and moments of understanding that he now found profound satisfaction. As summer slowly gave way to autumn, Ahmed and Sarah continued their gentle rhythm of life. Each day brought small surprises, quiet joys, and the deepening of trust and companionship. Ahmed had learned that it was never too late to open one's heart, to rebuild trust, and to embrace connection. The experiences of the past had not vanished, but they no longer weighed him down. Instead, they provided perspective, gratitude, and a newfound appreciation for life. One evening, as they sat together watching the sun set over the fields, Ahmed felt a sense of completeness. He realized that life was not about perfection or certainty. It was about presence, patience, and the willingness to accept the gifts that came unexpectedly. Sarah's presence had taught him that companionship could be gentle, meaningful, and transformative. He no longer feared the unknown. He welcomed it with quiet hope and trust. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Ahmed felt a deep sense of peace. He understood that life, even after decades of solitude, could still hold warmth, connection, and fulfillment. He had faced his fears, confronted his past, and allowed himself to embrace companionship once more. And in doing so, he discovered that life's greatest rewards often came in quiet, simple moments shared with another person who understood and cared. That night, as Ahmed lay in bed, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He remembered the long years of solitude, the moments of fear and hesitation, and the gradual steps toward trust and connection. He realized that life had a gentle way of surprising those who were patient and open. With Sarah in his life, he had discovered that even after decades of isolation, one could find warmth, companionship, and a renewed sense of purpose. And so, in the quiet of the night, Ahmed closed his eyes with a heart full of gratitude. The future was uncertain, but it no longer felt frightening. Life was rich, meaningful, and filled with possibilities. He had learned that connection, patience, and trust could transform even the quietest of lives into one filled with hope, joy, and the gentle promise of shared moments.